Hey there, and welcome to That News You Care About, a weekly video game news show from the folks over at That Nerdy Site. Today is Tuesday, July 6th, 2021, and I am one of your hosts, Logan Wilkinson. Joining me this week is my Phoenix Sun, Go Suns, Trevor Starkey.
Go Suns, indeed!
Trevor,
Finals for the first
they're
time
in it.
since
They
I
made it
was
to the NBA
I
Finals,
was a
yeah.
little baby, not a little baby, but like since I
Since
was
Charles
like
Barkley saying he
eight,
wasn't a role model, yeah.
yeah, 8 years
8 years
old.
old, I think.
92, 93 was when the Suns last were in the finals against the Bulls.
That was the year that the Bulls won their second title, I believe. Michael Jordan on fire that year.
Yeah.
Go watch it in The Last Dance. Great documentary. Anyway, we are not talking about basketball, unfortunately, but we are going to talk about all kinds of news. It is a packed week, actually, on the podcast this week. Starting us off is a piece that myself and Trevor, kind of saw and were kind of piqued our interest, to say the least, which is a piece over on IGN.com, a little website you might have heard of, from Rebekah Valentine, which is titled "Why Indie Publishers Are Fed Up with PlayStation." I also saw a few different threads from developers and publishers, publishers, from developers on this that I also found really interesting, which is actually how I first discovered it. It dives into multiple publishers speaking on social media and directly to IGN about Sony's lack of communication, sales restrictions, and the struggles of indie games to get noticed on its platforms. Some of the threads I found really interesting, actually, in terms of what Sony is kind of doing. Trevor, I don't even know where to begin with this one, but I'll throw it to you in terms of what are your initial thoughts, reading all the different threads, reading Rebekah's kind of wrap-up piece as a whole, and general impressions of where PlayStation is kind of handling its indie relationship at this point in time in 2021.
Yeah, a lot of this like weirdly did not surprise me. Obviously, we've seen like PlayStation go from having these summer indie sales. Like I remember for the longest time, every year I was looking forward to like in March or April they would be like, hey, we're going to release a new indie every week, and we're spotlighting these and we're showcasing them. This is where I found out a game like Counter Spy existed, or a handful of those. Like I remember even going back to like Hohokam and stuff like that in the PS3/Vita era, finding just cool, weird little games in that space. And I would go through and I would pick out kind of each, like every time they would do it, I would pick out and enjoy them. I think Rogue Legacy was one of them at one point. And it was like a cool little, like it like obviously Xbox had the summer at Xbox, or summer of Xbox, summer of indies, or what. Like I don't remember what their indie program was, but they had done that for a while during the 360 era, and then they'd kind of fallen away from it. And so that was like an interesting, like PlayStation kind of picking up the mantle and taking on indies. And then we saw, obviously, as the PS4 just skyrocketed in popularity, they're like, oh, hey, we don't really need to bolster our user base with like indie darlings and stuff like that. We can just kind of really showcase the bigger games, which we're going to make a bigger cut off of, and we're going to make more money off of those games. So let's go ahead and do that. And so like a lot of that we've seen kind of in the front facing side of things for a while. Like none of this, the thing that's new from this whole kind of conversation that who was it? Ian Garner kind of like kicked off when he said it in a very like vague but not vague kind of tweet thread, where he's like, I'm not saying Sony, but I'm kind of saying so. Like, I'm not saying Sony, but I'm saying it's not these other guys. Kind of thread about a lot of these pain points. Like we're seeing the specifics, and we're seeing a lot of people talk about the specifics of bad communication. But if you've been watching the PlayStation space since third-party development lost people like Gio Corsi and John Drake, like none of that is really particularly surprising. Like there was probably a reason that those guys left to go work for not Polyphonic. I don't know. The guys that did the Predator game is where Gio went, and then John Drake is over at Disney now, basically running their partnerships. So like there was probably a reason that they were like, hey, we're drowning here. We can't really, provide the support that we want to provide. So let's bounce. And I think that is probably supported by what we're seeing in a lot of these conversations that are coming out yeah, they just, I mean, like, I don't know how viable that would be anyway, to like how many account reps you would need to make it a viable solution for the number of indie games that come in here. It's the same reason like Steam doesn't really have that kind of like support, working on their platforms and stuff. But it like obviously they are saying a lot of this in contrast with ID at Xbox or with the Nintendo Indie Showcase. So clearly, like, somebody's figuring out ways to do it. Whether it's like how deep of involvement that is, I don't know. But yeah, like a lot of this didn't surprise me in what was presented. It was just like, oh, cool to see people actually like, speaking out about this, and we'll see if Sony, does anything to react to that. I doubt they will, because again, they're probably making money hand over fist, selling systems to as many people as they can, and making good money on their big games, especially now that they're charging an extra $10 a game on their big games and stuff like that. So yeah, like the indies will be there when they want to be there, but I from a business perspective, I get Sony not seeing the return on investment for that and shifting their focus elsewhere. It sucks, and I would love to see like more indies get love, and like the idea that indies are never like in the showcased featured pages of the PlayStation Store like that, like unless it is like a dedicated indie sale or something like that, and even there it's like you're one of 200 indies that are getting a spotlight. I scroll through those all the time. I'm like, I've never heard of 90% of these games, so why would I like check them out? What am I like? There are too many indies to go on these stores. It sucks, but like I'm never gonna check out. I remember in the days where I would like go through and read the drop, which they don't even post anymore.
Yeah.
Like reading those and being like who are these games for? Like who's going into the drop and playing or picking out these games and figuring out like this is something I want to take a chance on. Like, because some of those were just like, a lot of them are like bad mobile ports, and some of them you'll get like a diamond in the rough, like Oceanhorn or something like that. But like that is the rare experience of an indie game getting some love there on the store, and even that is like largely driven by a loud voice like Greg Miller getting behind Oceanhorn or something like that. So it's it's unfortunate, but it's also a lot of not really surprising from what we've seen in the front facing side. I mean, like even what we've seen in recent months between like the Epic and Apple like case and all the news that was breaking out of that, like PlayStation is dicks to even Epic, so like of course they're going to be dicks to indies, and because like they can't push back or they can't fight back. They know that PlayStation holds most of the cards in that scenario.
Yeah, it's an interesting one for me, right? I think me and you both have a special affinity and connection with the PS3 era of PlayStation, right? Like that is kind of the beyond era, kind of as we know it. It's certainly for me, like that is beyond era is the PS3 is what I think of.
Yeah.
And so really kind of getting into the video game kind of industry in that regard, right? Like really being knowledgeable to a different level about games,
like the beyond era and the PSN outage
and
era and all that stuff.
Yeah, right. Like it is like, to me, like it is that funny thing of like, even though we're 2 generations removed now, like that is still like, when I think of PlayStation, I think of like the PS3 and PS2 first, which was like really weird PlayStation, right? Like it was PlayStation doing weird shit and making weird games and embracing that and being very eclectic and having these really cool relationships with indies that led to really innovative and fun and like thoughtful and beautiful games being put on these platforms. And people could write books and books and books about like the change that happened over the PS3 era for PlayStation and into the PS4, and like what led to the massive success of that. But one of the things that was lost in that is PlayStation isn't weird, really. Certainly not in the way they were, but like even really at all. Like they're not the same kind of weird, zany, like eclectic, bizarre PlayStation. They're just like making all this weird shit like they were in the PS2 and PS3 era, right? Like they're much more straight laced. They're much more kind of, it feels like, buttoned down. And like to be fair, it's hard to critique them from that when they've sold 100 million plus PS4s, which is their primary focus, and millions of copies of video games. But there's something to be said for like the spirit of what PlayStation is, right? And I've been a little, I think, encouraged by seeing some of that come back at like the end of the PS4 and the PS5 era kind of started now, right? And like some of the threads detailed that like things are beginning to get better now for the indie like PlayStation relationship, but it is such a waste that, and I think it's something that like Rami Ishmael tweeted out, which is like it's such a waste that they let it get to this point where they had to rebuild it now, right? Like they were at the vanguard of indie relationships and development in the PS3 era. Like they were leading that. Like that was part of what made them so great. It was like these indie games on their consoles that like no one else was like given the same shout out and love to. And then they just kind of let the reins out of their hand and let it get away from them for an entire generation because they were so busy just demolishing everything else in their path as the PS4 juggernaut. So that now they want to kind of get back to that market as well. Xbox is so ahead of them there, right? Like even Nintendo, like you said, is so ahead of them here. Steam is just always going to have so many indie games on there that like they've fallen so far behind the other pack that they have to kind of rebuild these bonds and rebuild these connections and relationships that they never should let it atrophy to begin with, right? And it's even more frustrating because imagine the platform these indie games could have been given on the PS4 with the success and the market reach that that console had. These games could have been gotten huge spotlights on them and huge moments on the stage, and so they just weren't given that same chance, right? And even the best of games that were given the spotlight on the Xbox just weren't going to be the same thing because of the like 70 million console difference between these two platforms and these two console makers. And so it is so disappointing, right? Like I think of something like No Man's Sky, right? Like No Man's Sky got so much love and attention and focus from PlayStation, right? And like that is a small team that made that game, right? And there are so many other examples, not necessarily of the scale of No Man's Sky, but so many other examples of games that got those big shoutouts and got those moments and that got pops because of it. And I can't, I mean, I have to try to think of like indie games that got those same pops on the PS4, right? And that's such a disappointment considering where we were in 2000 and what, like 10 and 11 and 12 for the PS3, and like lead into the beginning of the PS4.
Yeah, I mean, I think there were some, and like it's interesting because I think PlayStation started at, doing it in like the PlayStation Plus, like that's where they would take like an indie and really give it a spotlight. So that's where you saw Fall Guys or Bug Snacks in the last year as examples. But even going back to like a Resogun, like giving that and making that like a launch title. And here we are now. I mean, like we can also fold it into kind of this conversation, but Sony did announce that they formally acquired Housemarque last week, as well as I think it was Nexus Studios, which is basically like the studio that's been helping them with like a ton of PC ports, leading to the notion that hey, more of the PlayStation games are probably going to be making their way to PC. So like PlayStation has still had those relationships, just at a very different level than like, hey, yeah, we're gonna spotlight a handful of these interesting. I mean, like The Witness is one I would say like absolutely got a spotlight on the PS4, and like a lot of weight and heft behind it because it was one of the like early PS4 games we saw really. So yeah, there are those examples, but they aren't in the like we see more now because we see Nindies or Nintendo doing like dedicated Nintendo Directs and admit it or we see like here are all the indie games coming to Xbox Game Pass. So you see them, but even there, I would say like I don't. Those are great deals that are probably benefiting those developers to some degree in a financial capacity, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you could have me watch a 30-minute Nintendo Direct, and I would remember maybe two or three games that comes out of it, because they're just even there they're not getting like a huge spotlight in comparison to everything else that is making its like I mean the all of the storefronts are you're getting 20 new games uploaded a week. Like how are any of them going to get a spotlight? How is like what are the ones that are going to break through and shine light? I and it's not even like indie necessarily, but like I tweeted out the other day I was like, "Hey, they announced a while back that Zombies Ate My Neighbors was getting like a PS4 port, and it has come out on other
Yeah, I
systems,
saw
but
that.
it's not like it has not as of like last time I checked, it still hadn't come out on PlayStation. And there's like back and forth between Lucas Games and PlayStation on like who's at fault and who like what's going on there. It's like well, that's a weird like thing that even they can't like make these things figure out. Okay, so then
Yeah.
how is it how is a small I mean like hell Cyberpunk couldn't get the thing working on PlayStation got delisted
Oh
for
my God.
9 months or whatever it was, before they finally like have made their return. I think they've made their return, or they're imminent to make their return, whatever the case may be. There, like, there's clearly been some shakeup, and yeah, a lot of it is in third party relations and indie stuff, and
Yeah.
PlayStation, yeah, is probably trying to kind of start putting things on the right foot. I mean, going back to when they appointed Shuhei Yoshida into that like independent developer relations kind of role that he's doing these days, like he's as one of like the last few like faces of the PS3 PS4 era.
Yeah.
Like I mean, it's trying to be a make good to that kind of audience, I think.
Yeah.
But I think even in that, I like the I often talk about the idea now, or think about the idea that like yeah, in the last era we had people like Sean Layden, we had Adam Boyes, we had Gio Corsi, we had John Drake out there, talking about these games and being kind of like like the faces of PlayStation corporate, Andrew House even. And then
Yeah.
that has shifted in the last
Exactly.
generation to instead of those guys, let's focus on Herman Hulst. Let's focus on Neil Druckmann. Let's focus on Cory
Cory
Barlog.
Barlog.
The I forget their names over at Insomniac. It's like they're taking like they're trying to make more Kojimas basically, and they're saying like let these guys speak for their studios on behalf of their studios, and the business people that like are crunching the numbers and working on the deals don't need to be the front facing. Like everybody doesn't need to be out there in PR. If you can do it and you're Pete Hines for Bethesda, great. But a lot of people aren't, and that's okay. Like they have other skill sets, so let those people focus on the things that make them good, and let's make the faces of PlayStation the people who are actually making the games, as opposed to the corporate heads of the company, I guess. So it's definitely been an interesting shift, and clearly indies have kind of been churned up and spit out a little bit as a result of that. But I do still think, I mean, I think especially in the PS Plus space is where we start to see, them getting a spotlight. Operation Tango, which a game that you and I have loved playing.
Hell yeah.
Like we would
Yeah.
never have seen or found or checked out if it hadn't been given that PlayStation spotlight.
Free and PS Plus. Yeah.
Even like stuff like Maneater and stuff. Like Maneater's double A,
Yeah,
but
that's
it's
another
still kind of an
great
indie, like it has an indie vibe and indie design to it and stuff like that. So like there's plenty of those out there. They're just not the it's not the golden era when there were still few enough indies that you could be making, a name for yourself as an indie, because there's just too many now. It's you're not like breaking the mold anymore, like Cappy Games or the early days of Supergiant, for example. So yeah, I think those are kind of my final thoughts on that matter.
Yeah, I mean, I think the last bit I'll say is that I think gaming as a whole and indie games are better off when you have a PlayStation that is kind of actively invested and involved in, I think, promoting and kind of pushing indie development forward. Just like I think it's benefited when Xbox is in the arena and Nintendo's in the arena, right? Like, I want a healthy competition of the three kind of fighting for indie games and kind of, deals and exclusive things and all that kind of stuff, because I think it makes gaming as a whole stronger because of that. And it makes indie games get, just a bigger and bigger spotlight and kind of allows more eyes to get on indie games as a whole, right? And so I hope that PlayStation really is kind of investing more in this again, that you're seeing kind of dive back into this kind of market again, and hopefully they've learned some lessons from what worked and didn't work in the past 10 years, right? Like in the same vein of, I think the PS4 era in a lot of ways was a reaction to what hadn't worked in a lot of ways in the PS3 era, while I think building off the solid foundation that had been set during the PS3. I would love to see the PS5 kind of be a continuation of that and be a reaction to what didn't work in the PS4 while continuing to build off that strong foundation, right? And I think one of the things that didn't work was PlayStation indie relations, and so I would love to see that kind of get a bigger focus and more attention paid to it, so that that can be strengthened, right? Because I think PlayStation has this unique ability and slightly responsibility as just the preeminent console maker at this point, to really give a spotlight to these games and these teams that are making them. To, I mean, the next generation of developers, more often than not, can get their start from indie games, and so to give them that chance, to give them that potential break, can be huge to these teams and to these developers. And so I would love to see PlayStation kind of pay that more attention again, and shine the spotlight back on them. But we're going to transition to the next topic, one I'm pretty excited about, even if it won't happen for years and years and years.
Speaking
Trevor,
of indie,
there are some rumblings, yeah, some whispers that this small studio, behind the likes of Red Dead Redemption, Bully, what is it, Manhunter, for a deep cut, and a little series called Grand Theft Auto might be coming out with its newest title. The link we have here is from Eurogamer.net, by Tom Phillips, which is don't expect Grand Theft Auto 6 anytime soon, with the amazing caption of Vice Iced, baby. That's a great subheader. But yeah, there are some reports that GTA 6 is kind of in the work. It seems that it might be set in the Vice City era, or location. Yeah. Whatever that even means in terms of the reimagining of what that city looks like, if it's as drastic as San Andreas was from San Andreas to GTA 5, but, or Liberty City, in that case, actually, from 3 to 4. Trevor, what are your initial thoughts on GTA 6 being a video game that exists within the next 3 years, even, we'll say? We'll be pretty generous there. And then B, and the bigger topic is, what do you want? You specifically want from the next Grand Theft Auto game that would get you excited about it and invested in checking it out?
I mean, like, I tend to enjoy the Grand Theft Auto games for what they are. I'm not the kind of person that's really going to hop in and spend time in Grand Theft Auto Online. But even Red Dead Redemption, I hopped in, did not like it, Red Dead Redemption 2. But I sat in, played through the whole game to be a part of the conversation, because these are massive games that are selling millions and millions and millions of units, of course. But I enjoyed the original, or the story of Grand Theft Auto 5 for what it was, and just the chaos of running around those maps. And sometimes we're recording this on Tuesday. I sat down and watched Cameron do his first No Pixel stream of Grand Theft Auto last night, and even that, as weird and as tedious as I think the No Pixel role play version of Grand Theft Auto is, there was a piece of me that was I kind of want to hop back into Grand Theft Auto and just run around and create some havoc in that city and have some fun. So, and especially the idea of like, going back to Vice City and the Miami kind of setting for it in a modern day, is interesting. It's much like, your Resident Evil Village is kind of a given that you've got Vice with VI in there for the 6. So, it's just a kind of of course that's going to be what we see. But I'm mostly intrigued by like the reasoning of why, hey, this probably isn't going to be something that comes out until 23, 24. Like in part, they're putting it out there and saying, we want the install bases of the current generation to be a lot more fuller and stuff. And I imagine there's an element of that is coming from releasing GTA 5 at the end of the PS3, Xbox 360 generation. So they were like, hey, those sold like gangbusters for us. And then we, a year later, double dip by putting it out on the next generation. And now, 7 years after that, they're going to triple dip by putting them out on the current gen of PS5 and Xbox One, or no, Xbox Series stuff. So there's like an interesting notion to just the business side of things there. But also they mentioned that they are trying to reevaluate crunch culture, especially after a ton of stuff was written out about the issues that they had with Red Dead. So like I'm all for them saying like, hey, it takes a lot of man hours to make these games, so let's not try and put those man hours into a condensed timeline. Let's say what that would actually look like over a larger span of time. I'm fine with that.
Years.
The things that I'm like, well, I'm going to be very curious how that plays out is like the next thing that I see in this article is pretty much in contradiction to that of, hey, they're playing with the idea of making Vice City a livable city a la the island in Fortnite that is constantly being updated and constantly being changed. I'm like, that means just like what we hear about, Epic and Fortnite, and admittedly even they've kind of stepped back on it, but like these kinds of games is, well, then you're not just crunching to release, you're now crunching in eternity because like the cycle of development is never ending. You're always continuing to work on the next update. So like that's an interesting thing that I'm curious from a gameplay perspective how that plays out. Like if I hop in, week 1 of Grand Theft Auto 6, how different is that going to be from hopping in, 2 years down the line or something? Will I have missed these crazy things, and are they really going to be basically preying on that FOMO mentality that you see, people jumping into seasons of Fortnite, like admittedly I myself have done. So yeah, there's like interesting things. That is probably the most fascinating component of it, and it's not something I would have like thought about, but it's certainly something that would help for the non-online, non-GTA Online version of the game. I mean, it's almost the destinification of these kinds of games. It's turning the base game into a live service type of game, and what does that look like? Because I mean, obviously the stuff we love about Vice City is the neon, the '80s throwback, the soundtrack, of course. So what does a modern Vice City look like? How different is that going to be? But at the same time, I think, especially as Florida has continued to be bonkers fucking crazy in like, I mean, think about the idea that like when Vice City came out, like the Florida guy was not yet a meme. Like, I can't imagine the side quests that you will have in a game like that, and the different types of stories that they will tell about random Florida guys and random encounters and stuff like that. The little yellow blips that would pop up on your GTA 5 map, like, and I'm gonna go on this, and suddenly I'm taking Trevor on a ride up to an altruist cult or something like that, and sacrificing people to, like, they're gonna eat these people that I've just driven up there. Like there's going to be tons of weird stuff like that in a modern Florida style based Grand Theft Auto that'll be fascinating. And then I think it'd be interesting depending on like how they play with culture, because they're talking about a lot of the same ideas of GTA 5 of like it's going to be multiple characters, so you're probably going to be switching perspectives like you did in GTA 5. So what are those perspectives? Is one of them a Cuban refugee or something like that, and you're falling in with a crew or something like that. Like what do those tales look like? Will we see any like favorites from Vice City make appearances in the game? Who knows? That's certainly what I'd like to see. Would be the things I remember about Vice City coming back and getting a spotlight shown. But then also just what does I think it is a different enough aesthetic compared to San Andreas to GTA 5 that I think you can have some fun in the stories that you tell. It'll be different without Dan Houser there because I think he was very much like the voice of a lot of those elements. But I'm open to seeing what a new team is putting together for.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really curious about this, right? And the theme of today, I both am excited for this and also am nervous about them messing with Vice City. As we talked about for a few different things off air. No, I mean, I love Vice City. I mean, it was one of my nominees in that Ultimate Video Game list show. It is one of my favorite games of all time, probably almost certainly my top 7 like list thing. Yeah, I mean, I think Vice City to me is the perfect one-off GTA experience, right? Like, I think 3 is the groundbreaking revolutionary video game, and then Vice City took that next year and just perfected it. I think the location, like Vice City proper, the entire space you're in is, I think, almost a flawless map. Like there's nothing unnecessary in that map. Like it's all so, I think, perfectly done with a purpose there. It's not too big, which will become an issue later on. It is just so well constructed. It's so well varied. It's such a blast experience. Like it is a map that like I can just close my eyes and like I can just like drive through that entire island still to this day and know exactly where I am at any point in time. I think that Tommy Vercetti is my favorite GTA protagonist because he's so unrepentant and just wanting to be like the biggest, baddest, swashbucklingest, like gangster. And it's great. I think that from whether it's like Lance Vance dance and all this kind of stuff, like the world and the characters felt so alive and so rich and so funny, and there was such a sense of humor that I think ran deep within Vice City, and the location in terms of like the 80s aesthetic obviously was fantastic. As you already alluded to, the soundtrack was fantastic. And then one of the things that was cool about Vice City was that like it did begin to build out that like PS2 era GTA kind of mythology where all the games were connected, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was the prequel. It is still to date the earliest set GTA game in '86. And so I think there's so much special about that game. I think that game is so great. I think it's probably the strongest from start to finish GTA story, because it kept it. It basically took what worked in 3 and did it better, and then didn't go overboard like San Andreas did, which I long think is just like the Red Dead Redemption 2 of the GTA series. Just it was too excessive. And so I think I'm really curious to see what that looks like now, right? Like if they just gave me that exact same city in PS5 graphics, I would be in love with that, right? They're going to radically reshape it, obviously, and so I'm, obviously a little nervous and excited at what that would be. What does a modern GTA Vice City game look like? Is it set in modern times? Do they put it in a different time period? Right, like what is this game? What is that world? Who are the characters, if any, that make appearances back? Um, yeah, like I'm really interested to see what they do with it because Vice City is such a, I feel like, time and place video game and experience, and so striking the chord on that again, I'm really interested about, and also what they've learned from GTA 5, which is like the best on video game of all time essentially, and so what lessons they've pulled from that, right? And what they've kind of grown in terms of what they liked and didn't like about that game's production and that game's launch and that game's world and characters and arc, right? Like, who are the protagonists, probably, maybe, of GTA Vice City? Or do we have multiple ones again? Or do we just go back to a single protagonist? What does the game structure look like? How is, like, all that things work? Like, how big is the game, right? Are they going to make it massive like GTA 5, or are they maybe going to kind of bring it smaller but make it, I think, everything in there really fleshed out? You can go on every building kind of thing, right? Like, what does the world look like in Vice City? Like, there's so many questions. You obviously have almost no answers about the game. In fact, we don't even technically know if it exists. But it's really interesting to kind of see what it looks like, right? Especially with it being, I mean, 20 years almost at this point since Vice City came out, right? And as you mentioned, Dan Houser's left, right? That team is very different from the PS2 era Grand Theft Auto team at this point. Um, where do they kind of take that story, and where do they kind of take these characters? I'm really interested to see, and I'm really excited to see what they do with it. Um, but I don't know. I mean, I just really love Vice City, and so if they just gave me anything like that, I would love it. And if they just give me a like PS5 remaster Rockstar of GTA 3, Vice City, and San Andreas, and I would love that. Yeah, I won't ever get it, but I would love that.
I mean, like as I'm continuing to think about it, I think the like if you take the map of GTA 5, obviously you have Los Santos is kind of your core area, but then you have Blaine County out there. So like, Miami Vice City is going to be, of course, your main kind of like downtown area, but then like you have Orlando, and there's going to be theme parks in Vice City in this game. Like I would imagine they're going to expand out
Obviously,
there.
we're gonna be
You're gonna have like the Everglades, and you're gonna have like fan boat racing and stuff like that, shit like that. And I'll be curious if they do the obviously the thing they've done, kind of like let's condense geography and stuff, but like will they have, in the far west of the map, will they go out as far to Saint Denis, which is like the Rockstar New Orleans from Red Dead Redemption, and you get like a New Orleans style flavor in this world as well. Like how much like the original San Andreas did maybe go too big in doing Vegas and San Andreas and Los Santos. I think that gives them enough to play with, and also do that thing where like people will look at this game and be like Rockstar didn't need to go this big, but maybe it's really cool that they do. And so it'd be like that like I'm looking at a map of kind of like Miami, and I zoomed out there and I was like, Orlando, yeah, like I definitely want to see what a GTA version of Disney World looks like, since we've never gotten that in the Los Santos kind of things. And then yeah, what if they do want to tie this universe together with the Red Dead? What does Saint Denis look like? 100 and some odd years later. And then as you were talking, I also thought of, I would love there to be because WWE is now doing a lot of stuff based out of Orlando, while like their corporate headquarters is still based out of Connecticut. Like all their wrestlers and stuff do their training in Orlando, and during this whole pandemic era, they've basically been like locked down in there. AEW has been locked down in Jacksonville pretty much. I would love to see a Vince McMahon stand-in character and like a whole like wrestling arc subplot thing, and see like what that satirically looks like from a GTA perspective, and have Austin Creed go in and like voice those characters or something like that. Have some fun there.
I would love that.
But yeah,
I would love that.
I like those are the kinds of things I would love to see in a GTA 6 Vice City. I would love to see them be expansive, and really like the idea of seeing the Orlando style theme parks has me very excited. So like even if it's not
I'm really
modern, or even if it's not the 80s flavor that we had of Vice City, it'll be like, if you think of like Vice City is of course influenced and heavily kind of ripping off of like Scarface and stuff like that. Maybe this will be
Miami
like
Vice, yeah.
Bad Boys, or maybe it'll dive into like the Fast and Furious. Obviously, like the first one and other elements, take place in the Los Santos, LA region, but Too Fast, Too
Too
Furious
Fast, Too
in
Furious. Yeah, I
Miami.
was gonna say, yeah.
There you go.
We got a ludicrous Tyrese appearance. No, I mean like I've for years, I mean literally for years and years and years and years at this point, because GTA 5 came out so long ago. Um, I've talked about how like I would love two things to happen for GTA 6, and neither one was it to be in Vice City. I kind of wanted to leave Vice City alone, and I was like, let's go somewhere new. Let's set it. Let's do like GTA Kansas City, right? Like have it be like, what does a Midwest crime game look like? Like a little bit like Fargo inspired, like that, like I
That
would
would
love to
be
see like that kind of thing, right?
boring
Like
as all
Kansas City
fuck.
Mafia, obviously famous. No, it'd be great. Like you could do like Rockstar could do so many fun things with, like a GTA like Midwest game. And then the other thing I always said was like I would love to see them go back to either doing just a straight up like GTA London again, and like what that world looks like, because it's obviously such a rich world to explore and have fun with, or just go totally off the board and go like GTA like Shanghai or GTA Tokyo or like GTA Seoul, like anything like that. Like just give me like an international GTA Berlin or Paris, obviously, or GTA Rome even. Like I would love to see them do something international as well. I don't think we're gonna get either one of those. I think
Oh
we're gonna
no.
get a GTA Vice City game. I think it's gonna be that's what we're gonna get. I'm still really excited about. Now I'm just like, man, I should play a GTA game again. But yeah,
Yeah,
I'm really curious what they do. I'm really curious what the story beats that they try to hit, and the kind of what they're. And I'm also really hoping that they make GTA they make GTA not so mean again, right? Like I think it peaked with like 4, where like 4 was just I think really not fun in terms of just like it's just really mean, I think, and they didn't get like the balance equation right. And I think 5 brought some of the fun back while also still being, I think, a little bit too like cut in its humor. And so I'd love to see them get kind of goofy and silly and just like fun, like some of those early PS2 games where we're like they were both serious but like never took themselves too seriously, and I would love to see like that kind of spirit back in a GTA game again, that we kind of began to get a little bit in 5.
yeah. I mean, the ideas of like GTA London or GTA, Shanghai or Tokyo or something like that are fun in theory, but they'll never happen for the same reasons. Like Assassin's Creed didn't really go to those areas. Like there just probably isn't an audience that would follow there. Like I think especially for what that series has been since GTA 3 is it is such a like indictment or commentary on American and like America culture, that like I think you'd be much more likely to see like a Chicago, or something in terms of like a place we haven't been. Like I mean, go back to whatever the Vegas stand-in was from San Andreas, like, and do like an Ocean's 11 type of heist kind of game or something like that.
Yeah,
Like that, I think
yeah.
are on the like the whiteboard of ideas way above anything like outside of the states.
I think GTA London would be great. I stand by that.
I mean, then you can go play
But
Watch Dogs Legion, but nobody did. So
people love it. That game is supposed to be really good though.
it says who? I mean, like
I
I didn't
think, I
play
think it
enough of it
reviewed pretty well.
no, it reviewed like fine. It reviewed like with most people being like, this would be a way better game if I wasn't playing every NPC. Like if my character had something I could connect to. Like the whole gimmick of that game
Sure.
did not connect with people. So, like I don't think it. I think it suffered as a result of that. I mean, it has its
But,
audience, but
sure. But the final story we'll wrap up today with is one brought by Trevor Starkey and Nintendo fans across the internet. It is from
don't
Polygon.com,
don't lump me with it in with
written
them.
by Michael McWhertor. I'm going to say Michael McWhertor. Called The New Nintendo Switch Isn't 4K to Almost Everyone's Surprise. It's a little presumptuous. But the Switch OLED model is a modest upgrade, is the subheader. Trevor, the Nintendo Switch is getting a bit of an upgrade, but maybe not the one people thought or were excited for it to get. Explain here for the masses.
Yeah, so obviously the quote Switch Pro, as it was kind of getting like named in the community and stuff. You're basically a PS4 Pro or something like that. The mid generation upgrade of a Switch has been rumored for a while due to some Bloomberg reporting from like I think March, that it was going to be a 4K upgrade, and people have been like scouring Breath of the Wild 2, screenshots or videos and stuff, and being like, this looks way too good to be playing on a base level Switch. So clearly there's got to be like a better version out there. And so the rumors out there have been for a while that like it was actually going to have improved hardware like built into it, like an improved NVIDIA chip, I think, in the model. But what they unveiled today, and like I woke up, like opened up my phone, and the first tweet I saw was like the video had just gone live. Basically, it was like Nintendo announcing this new OLED version of the Switch, and it is effectively the same Switch with a very slightly bigger screen, an OLED screen as opposed to I believe the like LCD screen that the current one has, and then like a few other like minor improvement features, like the like speakers are going to be a little bit better in handheld mode. The dock has a wired LAN port. If you have not bought like the wired LAN port adapter that you can get for the current Switch, like the back stand is like across the thing instead of just like the one little like leg that the current one has. So like, and I think that's about it. I think those are the things. And so it's not the like graphical improvement powerhouse that people were expecting this to be. And so there was a whole bunch of like people had built this thing up based on, reporting and stuff and whatever, I believe that Bloomberg had insiders that were, like supporting the idea that Nintendo was working on like a better version. I imagine they're suffering through the exact same like chip shortages that everything else is suffering from, and they probably just couldn't get them made and manufactured in time, so they probably fell back on this OLED version as a caveat, or not a caveat, but like as a fallback plan. That's my guess on what happened. But at the same time, I look at this and I'm like, I do not want them to do what they did with the new 3DS, which was like, hey, we've added, like we've increased the horsepower of the 3DS, and we've added this little nub joystick thing. So now there are games that you can only play on this device, and you cannot play on an old 3DS. I don't want them to do that. With the Xbox One X and the PS4 Pro, they were like improved versions and ran those games better. But you could still play all of the other games on those base consoles. And I don't trust Nintendo to allow that based on the most recent history that they've shown. So like
Nintendo history
of the two options, this is what I would honestly prefer to see, because I know that the screen being an OLED screen just means it's going to like look a little bit better and brighter, and they're not going to nothing under the horsepower is changing or anything like that. At the same time, I look at this, I'm like, I never intend to buy another thing that has Joy-Cons, because the Joy-Cons, like, it's still the same Joy-Cons, and they still have had the same Joy-Con drift problems since launch. And I've gone through like 3 sets of Joy-Cons, and the left Joy-Con continues to break every time. So I just have to use my Pro Controller anytime I want to play anything. And so I have zero interest in supporting Nintendo that's not fixing that core hardware issue.
Yeah.
But and I put out a Twitter poll this morning, out of curiosity to see, the people who are basically, I asked 2 questions. A, do you have a Switch already? And B, are you going to buy the new OLED one? And right now, like I basically said, like gave 4 options: yes and yes, yes and no, no, I don't have a Switch, but yes, I'm going to get the OLED, and then no's all around. And with 83 votes in, yes and no, so yes, we have a Switch, but no, we're not going to buy the new OLED, is about 70% of the vote, 69.9 if you want to have a little nice to yourself here. But 24.1%, so about 20 of those people are saying yes and yes. They already have a Switch, and they're going to go buy another one. And this is why the PS4, like, admittedly, this is why the PS4 and PS4 Pro generation did gangbusters, because they were able to sell a second device and have that count towards like the 100+ million that we've already talked about on this episode for the PlayStation side of things. And so, like, this is how the Switch makes it to 1 million, is they just keep releasing new, slightly better versions of the Switch, and the Nintendo diehard fan base will like gobble them up. And the fact that this one has like nice, sleek looking white Joy-Cons, cool, fine. They Joy-Cons still suck, but at least it at least it has an interesting new aesthetic compared to the other one. So those completionists that are going out and buying all those things will continue to do so. So yeah, I think that's like when we have those conversations of will the Switch, outsell the Wii or something like that, I think it has a good shot at it, because we've entered this era of gaming consoles that has like a mid-cycle upgrade that still counts towards that total, and people buy it. I mean, I'm myself to blame. I bought 2 PS4 Pros and an Xbox One X, despite the Xbox One X especially, despite barely ever playing my Xbox One. But I did it because I'm an idiot. So they're gonna prey on a lot of these other idiots, and people will buy other Switches. I did like one of my favorite little things about this that is like, oh, Nintendo, you're always going to Nintendo, is that the screen is, because the screen is slightly bigger, there's like fine print in all the stuff saying like, hey, this version of the Switch will not work incredibly well with any of the Nintendo Labo stuff if you happen to buy any of that. And so it's like, oh, Nintendo, you couldn't even like stay within your own like design parameters without breaking something. So it's like, oh, Nintendo. Well, the Kind of Funny guys always talk about weird Nintendo decisions, WNDs, and this is just yet the latest of them. So I looked at this and I was like, well, like, this does nothing for me. But even a Switch Pro idea that was going around really wouldn't have done much for me. I'm barely ever playing the Switch. If I am, I'm only ever playing it in handheld mode, pretty much. And like I'll pick it up if there is a specific experience I'm looking for, but like they just don't have a ton of those really. So I'll stick to playing on my console, on my big screen TV instead.
Agreed. That's how I like to play the games too. So there was Trevor's Nintendo happy hour for the episode, everyone. Otherwise, that's the show. We did it. If you like what you heard, you can go support us over at patreon.com/thatnerdysite, like all of our wonderful patrons have. Thank you, patrons. Your support means the world to us and helps keep the lights on and make shows like this and like that D+ show happen. Again, you can go over to patreon.com/thatnerdysite and go check out all of the goals, tiers, gadgets, gizmos, and whatnots over there, and help support us. You can also support us by going over to the podcast service of your choice and liking, subscribing, sharing with your friends, and telling all your friends and family and neighbors all about the shows and the podcast. Otherwise, you can go rate and review us on iTunes, give us some 5 stars, write a nice little review, tell us why we're so cute and good at doing shows. Otherwise, you can go find Trevor at Trevor J. Starkey on the internet. Trevor, anything that you want to shout out or plug?
So we didn't record a That Nerdy Site show this week, so I don't have one of those to plug. But otherwise, which I'm now going to just use because I think Logan used it 7 times in his outro there, I will plug the Summer of Star Wars that we're continuing to do over on that D Plus show, because that is a ton of fun. This week is going to be Revenge of the Sith as we wind down our time with the prequels. I've already sat down and watched it, so I'm looking forward to the conversation that I will be having with the rest of the crew. And then over on the Let's Play front, I've been dragging my feet in updating and editing the latest episode of me and Logan playing Operation Tango, which again we talked about earlier in the show. So instead, I fell back on a series of Let's Plays of me playing through Emily is Away 3. Back when it came out, that we have been kind of releasing as like a low effort. It was a holiday weekend. Let's just kind of like relax a little bit and recharge the batteries. So those are going up, and you can go check those out in lieu of newer ideas or newer stuff on the Let's Play side. But we do still have those Let's Plays going up, so go check out any of that stuff.
Absolutely. You can go find me at LeftyLogie or LeftyLoggy, LOGGY on the internet. I will echo Trevor's shoutouts of Emily's Away 3 Let's Plays going up. As someone who co-hosted with him on his run through Emily's Away 2. Go check that out as well. That was a lot of fun. Go check out all of the Emily's Way Let's Plays from all 3 games we have. We have lots of them on the site's YouTube page. From Cameron's experience with 3 through Trevor's journey through 1, 2, and now 3, as well as the spoiler cast discussion, and also the That News You Care About show with myself, Trevor, Cam, and Kyle Seeley. We are big fans of Emily's Way, as you can tell, so go check out all of that. Otherwise, I will give a shout out to last week's episode, actually, of That D Plus show, when we sat down and talked about Attack of the Clones. I thought it was a good episode. It only got derailed for probably about 20 minutes by Cameron going on a diatribe against Attack of the Clones, and I consider that a success personally. Movie's not good, admittedly, but the discussion was good and a lot of fun. So go check out that. Go check out all of the other That Nerdy Site content. Otherwise, you can go find That Nerdy Site at That Nerdy Site all across the internet. And for myself, for Trevor, and for all of us here at That News You Care About and That Nerdy Site, play your games and be good to each other. Class dismissed.